Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Bridgeton Miracle, written by Random 3X. It had only been a few months since he'd seized the ebony throne, yet these constant rebellions from the unsatisfied lords were becoming obnoxious. He knew a certain amount of discontent was to be expected. It happened every time big changes were being put in place. But the sheer number of these little uprisings was becoming asinine. The one that he and his accompanying forces had just dealt with was a response to them lowering taxes for the poor to help increase their food surplus. You'd think that it was the nobles losing the income, but it was the common folk. They had launched a little uprising simply because they were getting fat and were upset about it. "Where's the next one?" Alex groaned, looking at his chief aide Icarus, a young vampire of little power, but exceptional skill in all things paperwork. "South Bridgeton, my lord," Icarus replied, keeping the casual tone, something Alex had specifically requested, having always despised anything too formal, likely due to his upbringing as a commoner. "What's their complaint? It's not like they want to be North Bridgeton despite being the most southern of the three towns. No, sir, they..." Icarus paused as he reread the declaration from the town. "They, declare you are a false ruler who seized the throne through illegal means and that they will resist a filthy human dark lord to their final breath." "Oh, an actual complaint for once rather than a petty gripe. What have the scouts said?" "They report the lords have sealed themselves up in the western part of the town and abandoned the common folk." "Collapsed the bridge, I assume?" Icarus nodded to the question. "Yes, sir. The few attempts to build a new one with forward forces have been blocked by them collapsing or dispelling any earth magic cost to make a new one. Any suggestions on the octogram? Move through Middle Bridgeton, or build a bridge out of their reach, encircle them, and lay siege. I don't think I will. I grow tired of all these little fights. The display of power for those far from the capital, when it was taken, should do well. We shall march across the great chasm, through South Bridgeton. My lord, I am aware you are truly an unrivaled earth mage, but even with your skills, you will not be able to block them from dispelling your efforts." "Too true," Alex nodded agreeably. "I have a scheme brewing, though. I will need to see the ground and, of course, offer them a chance to give up." Icarus nodded. Despite his boss's bloody reputation, he knew Alex would always give a chance to surrender, even if the offer was all but guaranteed to be rejected, even if it would endanger himself to make it. He would always give every chance at peaceful outcome on an attempt. "We arrived, my lords," a voice from the carriage driver announced. Exiting the vehicle, the pair came upon the eastern half of South Bridgeton. 3 such towns existed, bridging the gap of the bottomless chasm, a place said to reach all the way to the depths of hell. In all his experience, even Alex did not know what was at the bottom, though the times he had crossed the bridges, he had felt what could only be described as something primal below. The eastern half of the town was unremarkable, more of a small outcropping for the gate to the western half, considering the 3 Bridgetons would be defensive positions in case of an invasion. It made sense not to build as heavily on the side from which the invaders would approach. "So the road is paved with cobblestone," Alex muttered, tapping his foot on the main road that led to where the crossing used to be. "Yes, sir, to better allow trade into the Greedlands, I've been told." "Makes sense. I remember when this was all gravel. Gods, I feel old now." "Well, older," Alex muttered as he knelt and placed a hand on the ground. "What are you doing, sir?" Nothing much. I'm just checking something I remember you mentioning in the past." "So, shall we go greet our rebels?" Alex asked with what was now a signature manic grin. Continuing down the main road, the pair felt many watchful eyes of the residents who had been abandoned. It wouldn't be without precedence to burn the place to the ground just for their lord's rebellion. Many Dark Lords that had ruled before Alex had used such tactics. Ignoring the gazes, though, Alex pressed on towards the end of the road, where a sheer rock face dropped out beneath them. Across the way, they could see a swarm of soldiers surrounding a plump orc in what, even from this distance, was clearly fine garb. "Lord Bridgeton, I presume," Alex shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. I am he. Who are you?" "Another messenger," the orc replied, his voice amplified by some magic tool in his hand. Alex smirked at the question. "No, I'm the man whom you chose to disparage and call false. I've come to answer your challenge." Alex shouted back, only to reflexively hold out his staff and conjure a mana shield as a rain of crossbow bolts and arrows flew at him and Icarus. I refuse to recognize your rule, Lord Bridgeton roared as the projectiles continued to pelt the shield. I don't need your consent to rule. I'm giving you one chance to surrender. You and your immediate family shall be executed, but I guarantee the lives of the children. Come and try me, you human filth. At his response, Alex let out a deep sigh and stabbed his staff into the ground at the very edge of the chasm. I thought as much, but I always try. With a sudden, swift motion, he lifted his staff out of the ground, causing a metallic shing to echo as the shield grew in size, only for him to stab it back into the ground. Know this, Lord Bridgeton, I shall march across this chasm tomorrow, he announced clear for all to hear as the metallic shing rang out once more as he drew his staff out of the ground, only to stab it into the ground again, increasing the size of the shield, so it now shielded the entire town from the west. I shall march across it with my honor guard behind me and build a bridge you cannot dispel or break at walking pace, Alex roared, stabbing his staff back into the ground one final time, leaving the staff in the ground. He turned back to the force, still trying to shoot him. You hear that, my guard? You, who are my most trusted and loyal soldiers. The few hundred soldiers following quietly behind the pair roared in triumph, announcing that they would follow. How are we going to do that, sir? Icarus asked. He did not doubt that Alex would be able to do it. He was just curious about how. Simple, dear Icarus. We shall build the bridge out of something they cannot destroy. And that is, sir, mithril, came Alex's confident reply. Icarus paused mid-step. Mithril would indeed be able to resist any attempt to damage it with magic. The problem is that building a bridge out of the material would cost an ungodly amount. Indeed, it was an amount a nation that had just started recovering from a civil war could not afford. Despite this, Icarus knew that he would be in for a sight that history would love to retell. It was later in the evening, and most of the force had caught up and camped outside the town. They made extra effort not to antagonize or even mistreat the locals, a direct order from Alex himself. So, how are you going to make a bridge out of mithril, you dumbass? A voice that held no respect for her boss asked as she put muddy boots onto the table in front of her. Those present knew not to reproach her for her manner of speech, in part because she was a sinful Lord of Wrath, but mostly because she was known to be the closest friend of the Dark Lord. Anyone who tried to reproach her had long ago found out the Dark Lord himself would tell them off. Simple, you. We all know how mithril is made, right? I don't, one of the officers said awkwardly, raising his hand. At this admission of ignorance, the Dark Lord's eyes lit up both figuratively and literally. You, however, just let out a long sigh. You've triggered his teacher mode. Yes, he has, Alex beamed. Boy, you know the magical material, yes? The officer panically nodded, and suddenly being the very sole focus of the Dark Lord before him. Yes, my lord, mithril, adamantine, magicite, and orichalcum. Alex smiled and nodded. Very good, boy. Do you know how they are formed? The officer shook his head. Adamantine is formed where sheer force of will takes solid form. It is why it is found mostly around the Dark Continent. We are a very stubborn lot, and it naturally forms in the ground beneath us. Magicite, as I am sure that you can imagine from the name, forms in places of truly high magic concentrations. Orichalcum is actually an alloy of adamantine and mithril. And mithril, my lord? The officer asked. Faith, came Alex's casual reply. It's why the theocracy has such a monopoly on the stuff. So you'll build a mithril bridge with faith? In a way, if I use earth magic infused with enough faith, well, I can create mithril, Alex explained. And how will we do that, my lord? A general asked. At a walking pace, no less, Icarus added. Easy. The men of my honor guard shall march in formation. They shall play the marching drums in a fun, rhythmic fashion, and Guy respond to music. This will enhance my earth magic further. I do not see where you'll get faith from, Alex, you asked, finally sitting up straight with a fascinated grin. Simple. What is the most powerful form of faith? I'm not a student, Alex. Don't just throw riddles at me and speak straight. You're no fun, Alex said with a pout. Very well. The men shall be blindfolded as they march across the chasm. They shall have blind faith in my ability to build the bridge as they march. But if you do that and fail, they shall fall to their deaths, the general protested. Worry not. I shall be some 30 paces ahead of them. If it fails, the only one who dies is me. I must protest, sire, the general begged. To lose you would be the worst outcome. Please, do not joke about such an event. Fine, I get it. But I was serious. We shall march down the main road. They shall be blindfolded and playing drums. I shall be at the forefront, using my staff shield to keep them safe, while I use my magic to form the bridge. Well, I'm sold. I want a front row seat to this show. I'll be on the front line of the forces. Need someone who can see to keep them in line, you declared, thumping her fist onto the table, knocking over a few of the drinks on it. But, sire, the general pleaded, only to see nothing would move Alex. Icarus rested a comforting hand on the general's shoulder. Worry not, General, he's entirely mad, but he's not stupid. It was the morning of the march, and Icarus had been roped into the honor guard's march simply to help keep them on track. True to his word, Alex had gotten his most loyal soldiers to blindfold themselves after they got into positions outside town. Soldiers, are you ready? Alex's voice boomed. In response, the soldiers stomped their feet 3 times. Begin the drums and march a steady pace. Let the guides keep you on track. Icarus could feel his heart pound as a few hundred drums began to beat in a matched rhythm. The Dark Lord he had sworn to follow was ahead of the force some 30 paces. The man was already bobbing and weaving back and forth in some manic dance. The force continued down the cobblestone road, passing baffled onlookers. Icarus's belief in Alex began to waver as they continued to march forward. How would he ensure that the men's faith wasn't wavering either? Would their faith be enough? As they continued forward, something odd seemed to catch Icarus's eye. Had someone moved it? Alex's staff, which had been at the very edge of the chasm, was now some 30 paces away from the edge. We're almost there, men, Alex shouted as they pulled his staff from the ground, causing a metallic shing to echo again. It was now the scheme Alex had concocted started to make shape in Icarus's mind. When the men watched yesterday, Alex had made a very big show about his staff making that ringing noise, enough that the idea that ringing sound would be where the edge would start. Only it wasn't. So even the men whose hearts wavered would find solid ground where they expected to find a chasm. Icarus had to admire the sheer trickery of what Alex was doing, something he was sure the god Loki would thoroughly approve of. Any doubt, any little sliver of doubt any of the men had would vanish when they stepped past the point. Only there was still no bridge ahead of them. 30 paces away, long past the point, he could see nothing appearing. 20 paces, and still nothing. Alex was still walking forward, but the man was prodigious with his airstep, so it was not something that he could fully rely on. 10 paces, and Icarus kept his heart solid. Blind faith wasn't the only thing that would create Mithril. He would believe in his boss, his master, his friend. Lord Bridgeton watched from the edge of his castle balcony, looking down the main road on the other side. He had started his little rebellion partly because he was genuinely could not stand the idea of a human rooting him, but mainly to get reduced taxes. It was a typical little tactic nobles use: stir up trouble, complain and surrender, and get a few benefits to behave. He had heard of the new Dark Lord's reputation for mercy, and knew his empty bluff from the previous day was just that, a bluff. The idea of building a bridge out of Mithril itself was laughable. Only, as he looked down the chasm, could he hear a deep thrumming beginning to boom out. Marching drums, Lord Bridgeton assured himself. Nothing to worry about. They will make a show of marching around and then make a fresh offer. The drums grew louder as they approached. Still, he did not doubt that it was all a show, even when his grandfather had begged him to not proceed with the plan. Weeping like a fool, he asked him to beg mercy from the Dark Lord. Yeah, they are all blindfolded, he muttered confusedly, finally spotting the force marching down the main road. We're almost there, men, the human Dark Lord announced, while still far from the edge. Old Bridgeton let out a sigh of relief. He had actually let himself think that for a moment they would keep marching. Only a moment, though it was laughable too. His mirth faded as the blindfolded soldiers did not stop. Is he mad? He muttered under his breath as the soldiers continued, not slowing their pace. Ha! He'll march them to the death! The Lord broke out into laughter at the sight of it. Only his laughter faded as a reflection of the morning sun beamed into his face, shielding his eyes. His breath caught in his throat. The glimmering, pure silvery sheet of metal shone out as an ornate bridge began forming under the Dark Lord's feet as he led the way. Mithril was all he could mutter as the soldiers finally stepped onto the bridge behind their leader. Soldiers who did not slow down nor turn away. Soldiers marching towards his. Send the mages and dispel the bridge, the Lord barked, only to see the hopelessness in the eyes of his mages. It cannot be done, my lord. The Mithril would resist our magic. Archers, shoot them as they march. The Lord's panicked order was obeyed only for the shield that had blocked them the day before. The staff letting the shield move before the soldiers. Every bolt and arrow hit the wall of magic and fell limply into the chasm below. "He's over halfway, my lord," one of the majors shouted. "I can see that," the lord cried out in response. "He was an empty threat. He is weak, merciful, and human." "We wouldn't make a good on his threat the previous day, would he?" the lord asked. But he received no response from the terrified-looking members of his family, who had, till this moment, been somewhat hopeful for the scheme's outcome. "Should we feed the town, my lord?" a servant suggested. "They would shoot us in our backs. Besides, the new greed is entirely loyal to that monster. We have nowhere to run." "Then what do we do?" the lord's eldest son asked. "Victory or Valhalla," came the lord's terse reply, as he removed the ancestral family sword from above the fireplace. "Victory or Valhalla." The events that occurred this day became known as the Bridgeton Miracle. It was said that the 13th Dark Lord of the Shadow Empire built a bridge of impossibly valuable and strong material at walking pace, the reporter explained to a camera. While undoubtedly apocryphal, the bridge that still stands to this day is still celebrated annually. The festival, which takes place over 2 days, ending with the recreation of the ritual that supposedly made the bridge, where the townsfolk dress up and march across blindfolded. This is Blake Bridgeton, reporting from the town with my family's name. Back to you in the studio. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.